Imagine this. You've built your business from the ground up, you've earned the trust of your community, and suddenly, everything is at risk because of hidden fees and deceptive contracts. What would you do? Stay tuned to find out how one CEO took control of a scandal that threatened everything he worked for, and how you can avoid making the same mistakes in your own business. Marcus had always been the kind of CEO who took pride in being hands-on. It wasn't just about running a business for him. It was about building a legacy, something that would stand the test of time. He had been in the car dealership industry for over a decade, starting with just a single lot and gradually expanding into a chain of successful dealerships. He knew every detail of his operation, from the sales tactics his team used to the intricate workings of the financing department. Nothing ever slipped past him. But on this particular morning, something felt different. Marcus didn't have a meeting scheduled, but as he sat at his desk at home, he felt an unexplainable urge to visit his dealership. It wasn't a feeling of doubt or worry. It was more of an intuitive pull, like the business was calling him in. Perhaps it was the growing number of new customers walking through the door, or maybe he was sensing that things were shifting within the company. Either way, he decided to trust his gut. As he drove to the dealership, he noticed how quiet the morning was, with only a few early risers out on the streets. When he arrived, the dealership was buzzing, just as he expected. The usual sounds filled the air, the chatter of salespeople greeting potential buyers, the faint hum of the air conditioning, and the constant ticking of the clock in the corner of the room. But as Marcus stepped into the showroom, something felt off. It wasn't anything he could immediately put his finger on. It was a subtle unease in the air, as if something important was hanging just out of sight. "Good morning, Marcus," greeted Kelly, one of the sales managers, with her usual bright smile. Marcus returned the greeting, but his mind was already racing. He noticed the sales floor was unusually quiet for this time of day. The team seemed distracted, their conversations more stilted than usual. The energy just didn't feel the same. He brushed it off, reminding himself that perhaps it was just a slow morning. After all, every business had its ebbs and flows. He continued walking through the showroom, admiring the pristine cars displayed on the floor, their polished exteriors gleaming under the bright lights. But still, that nagging feeling lingered in the back of his mind. Marcus decided it was time to check in with Sam, the finance manager. Sam had been with the dealership for several years and was known for his dedication to his work. Marcus trusted him, so if there was something wrong, it was the right time to dig deeper. He entered Sam's office and found him buried in paperwork, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Morning, Sam. I just wanted to take a quick look at the latest contracts. Can you bring me up to speed on what's been going on with the numbers lately?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Sam looked up, his face momentarily blank before he quickly masked his surprise. "Of course, Marcus. No problem at all. I've got the latest contracts right here," he said, reaching for the stack of papers on his desk. Marcus could see the hesitation in Sam's movements, the way he avoided direct eye contact. It was a subtle detail, but one that didn't escape Marcus's keen observation. As Sam passed him the contracts, Marcus took a moment to scan the papers. The words blurred together at first, until something caught his eye. There it was, a clause in one of the contracts that stood out like a sore thumb. The interest rates were alarmingly high, and hidden fees were tucked away under vague terms that didn't make sense. Something didn't sit right with Marcus. He had reviewed contracts countless times before, and this one felt different. Sam noticed the change in Marcus's expression. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice a little too cautious. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued flipping through the pages, each one revealing more troubling details. The fees were inconsistent with what they had agreed upon in their dealership's policies. And the interest rates? They were far above the standard industry average. A sinking feeling formed in Marcus's stomach. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something far worse. How could these terms have made their way into the contracts? Were they part of an internal strategy to increase profits? Or was there something else at play? Finally, Marcus looked up from the contracts, his voice sharp. "Sam, explain to me why these terms are here. This isn't what we agreed on with our customers." As Marcus flipped through the contracts, a deep sense of unease washed over him. His fingers paused on a particular page, his eyes narrowing as he read the terms. The contract, at first glance, appeared to be a standard car loan agreement, the kind they processed on a daily basis. But as Marcus continued, His gut instinct told him that something was terribly wrong. The first red flag was the interest rate. It was much higher than what Marcus had ever approved. His dealership had always prided itself on offering fair rates, ensuring that customers could drive off the lot without feeling like they were drowning in debt. But this rate, it seemed, was calculated to maximize profit at the expense of the customer. The numbers didn't add up, and Marcus felt a knot tighten in his chest. How had this slipped through? It wasn't just a small oversight. It was a blatant manipulation of the financial terms. He turned the page, only to find even more concerning details. There were clauses buried deep within the fine print that seemed deliberately vague and complicated. Legal jargon piled on top of each other, designed to confuse rather than clarify. It was as if the terms were specifically crafted to prevent the average customer from fully understanding what they were signing. Marcus's anger began to grow as he realized the extent of what was happening. Then came the worst part, a list of additional charges that had no business being included in a car loan agreement. The contract listed administrative fees and dealer service charges, but these were vague and unexplained. Marcus had never agreed to such charges being tacked on to a customer's loan. What were these fees for? Why hadn't the customers been informed about them before signing the agreement? Marcus was familiar with the typical fees that came with car loans, processing fees, registration fees, and so on. But these charges were different. They weren't part of any approved structure he had put in place for his dealership. Worse still, these fees were often hidden in a way that made them hard for customers to spot, with no clear breakdown of what they were for. It became clear to Marcus that these charges weren't legitimate. They were just a way to take advantage of the customer's trust. His heart raced as he continued reading. Each page seemed to unveil more hidden terms and conditions, all designed to trap unsuspecting buyers into bad deals. The customers were being misled, coerced into signing agreements without fully understanding the financial consequences. As a businessman who had built his career on providing quality service and treating people fairly, this was a betrayal of everything Marcus stood for. The anger inside him began to boil. This wasn't just a mistake or an isolated incident. This was a systemic issue. The dealership, under his nose, had been engaging in practices that were not only unethical but also illegal. How could his trusted team have let this happen? How had the finance department, a department he had handpicked, allowed such deceptive terms to make it to the final contracts? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. His dealership, the very business he had worked tirelessly to build, was now being implicated in practices that went against everything he had ever worked for. It was supposed to be a place of trust, where customers were treated like family. Instead, it seemed that some of his employees had turned it into a machine for extracting money from those who trusted them most. His thoughts shifted from anger to determination. Marcus knew he couldn't let this slide. His dealership had built its reputation on honesty and integrity, and he wasn't about to let that foundation crumble because of a few bad actors. He had to act fast, but most importantly, he had to act with transparency. The customers who had been affected by these unfair practices deserved answers, and they deserved compensation. Marcus knew that it was time to take control of the situation before it spiraled out of hand. In the pit of his stomach, Marcus felt the weight of the responsibility that rested on his shoulders. This wasn't just about fixing a business issue. It was about righting a wrong and ensuring that those who had been deceived got the justice they deserved. He took a deep breath, pushed the stack of contracts aside, and picked up his phone. He was about to make some very important calls. As Marcus continued to dig through the stack of contracts, his frustration grew with every passing page. The more he read, the more he realized that this wasn't just an isolated mistake. It was a pattern. It wasn't one rogue employee or a single dishonest act. No, this was something far more disturbing. The questionable terms and hidden charges weren't confined to just one or two contracts. They were embedded in multiple agreements, suggesting that this practice had been going on for months, if not longer. Each contract told a similar story. Customers who had come in to purchase a car, excited and ready to drive away with a great deal, were instead being shackled with terms that were not clearly explained to them. The interest rates were inflated, hidden fees were added without explanation, and worst of all, the customers were not informed about the full scope of the financial burden they were agreeing to. They had walked into Marcus's dealership trusting that they would be treated fairly, and instead, they were being misled. The deeper Marcus dug, the more his stomach churned. He began to recognize names of some of his most loyal customers, families who had returned to his dealership time and time again, convinced they were getting the best deals. They were now the victims of a predatory scheme that had gone unnoticed until now. His mind raced with questions. How many more had been affected? How many people had walked off the lot thinking they had secured a fair deal, only to be blindsided by payments they couldn't afford? And how had this gone unnoticed by his own trusted team? The sense of betrayal hit Marcus hard. He had built his dealership on the pillars of transparency, fairness, and customer satisfaction. His business was known for treating people like family, for ensuring that everyone who walked through the doors felt valued and respected. The idea that his employees, people he had trained and trusted, could be responsible for such deceptive practices left him reeling. He couldn't understand how this had happened under his watch. How had his values been so easily undermined by the very people he had handpicked to help run the business? But as the anger began to subside, Marcus realized that this wasn't the time for emotional reactions. This was the time for action. He couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. He had a responsibility to his customers, to his employees, and to the legacy he had worked so hard to build. If he didn't act quickly, the reputation of his dealership, something that had taken years to earn, could be permanently tarnished. Determined to get to the bottom of the issue, Marcus took a deep breath and picked up his phone. His mind was sharp, focused, and he knew that what he was about to uncover could change everything. He needed to gather his team, confront the individuals involved, and get answers. But most importantly, he needed to take control of the situation before it spiraled further out of hand. "I need a meeting, and I need it now," Marcus said firmly as he dialed the numbers of his top managers. His voice was calm, but there was an undeniable strength to it, one that commanded attention. This was no longer just about business as usual. It was about making things right and protecting the integrity of the dealership he had built. He could feel the weight of the responsibility resting heavily on his shoulders, but Marcus had always prided himself on his ability to lead through adversity. The meeting was set within the hour. As Marcus prepared to confront his management team, he reminded himself of one thing. He would approach this with the same fairness and transparency that had always defined his leadership. But this time, it would be different. This time, there would be no room for excuses, no tolerance for dishonesty. The future of his dealership depended on it. Within an hour, the senior management team gathered in the dealership's conference room. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Marcus, standing at the head of the table, slowly laid out the contracts in front of each person. His fingers lingered over the documents, and his eyes scanned the faces of his team, searching for any sign of recognition, guilt, or surprise. The contracts were damning, and Marcus's mind raced, his heart heavy with the weight of betrayal. The hidden fees, the excessive interest rates, these were not just small mistakes. They were intentional, crafted to deceive. "Do any of you know about this?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking slightly with a mix of disbelief and frustration. His hand pointed to the glaring errors, fees that were never explained, interest rates far beyond what the dealership ever authorized, and terms buried deep in the fine print. His chest tightened as he searched their faces for an answer, but there was only silence. The silence grew unbearable. His patience, usually a cornerstone of his leadership style, was quickly eroding. He had always prided himself on building a team based on trust and transparency, but now it seemed that those values had been shattered. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the dealership's air conditioning. Finally, Sam, the finance manager, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes met Marcus's, but only briefly. "Marcus, I had no idea about those hidden charges. I thought everything was approved by the finance team." Sam's voice trailed off, and he dropped his gaze to the table, clearly embarrassed. His usual confident demeanor had vanished, replaced by a man who seemed to be struggling with the weight of his own conscience. Marcus could see the unease in Sam's posture, the way his hands fidgeted with the corner of his notepad. But Marcus's frustration didn't abate. He took a deep breath, then turned to the sales managers. "What about you? Were you aware that customers were being signed into these terrible deals?" Marcus's voice had taken on a firmer, more commanding tone. His eyes scanned the room, meeting each manager's gaze. "I want to know if any of you were a part of this." If you knew what was going on and didn't speak up, then you were just as responsible as anyone else. The sales managers exchanged uneasy glances, each of them shifting in their seats. Their silence was deafening. It was clear they were caught in a difficult position, whether to take responsibility or to deny their involvement. Marcus could see the hesitation on their faces, the anxiety in their eyes, but no one dared to speak. Not a single one of them stepped forward to address the growing tension. Marcus's suspicions only deepened. He had known his team for years. Many of them had been with him from the beginning. They had worked together to build this dealership into the success it was today. But now, it felt like something had shifted, like his trusted team had been operating under a completely different set of values. His mind raced. How could they let something like this happen? How could they not have raised concerns when they saw what was going on? He stood tall, his voice hardening as the weight of the situation settled in. I've built this business on trust. Trust with our customers and trust with each other. If we can't uphold that trust, then this dealership doesn't have a future. His gaze swept across the room, his eyes locking with each of the managers in turn. We're putting a stop to this right now. No more lies, no more deception. If we can't restore integrity to this business, we might as well shut it down today. I won't let this continue, and I won't allow anyone here to undermine the values we've built this business on. The room was thick with tension, the gravity of Marcus's words hanging heavily in the air. For a moment, no one moved. The reality of the situation was sinking in. Marcus's decision was final. He wasn't going to let this slide, no matter the consequences. His reputation, the dealership's reputation, and most importantly, the trust of their customers were on the line. And Marcus wasn't about to let that go without a fight. Finally, he spoke again, his voice calm but firm. I want a full review of every contract signed in the past 6 months. We're going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to make it right. I expect every single one of you to take responsibility for this, and if anyone here is found to be complicit in these actions, there will be consequences. We will not let this business become something it was never meant to be. The senior team nodded in agreement, some looking remorseful, others still in shock. Marcus knew that this wasn't going to be easy. Rebuilding trust would take time, but he was ready to do whatever it took to restore the integrity of his dealership and make things right for the customers who had been affected. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Marcus was taking control of his business again, and he wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. The following morning, Marcus knew that confronting the issue head-on was the only way forward. The severity of the situation demanded immediate action, and he couldn't afford to waste time. He called an all-hands meeting with the entire staff, bringing everyone together to address the issue that had rocked the dealership to its core. As the employees filed into the conference room, Marcus felt a mixture of determination and apprehension. This was a critical moment, one that would define the future of his business. When everyone was seated, Marcus stood at the front, his hands resting firmly on the table. There was no room for sugarcoating the situation. He had made the decision to be transparent and honest with his team, no matter how difficult it might be. With a calm, measured tone, he began to speak. We've made mistakes, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of responsibility. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I won't pretend otherwise. This dealership has taken advantage of its customers, and that is something I will not stand for. But the good news is that we're going to fix it. We will make it right, and we will do better. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. There was an undeniable tension in the room, but Marcus knew it was necessary. The truth had to be laid out in front of everyone. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his staff. Some looked guilty, others shocked, but none seemed surprised. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and there was no turning back now. Our customers deserve better, Marcus continued. We've built this business on trust, and it's time to restore that trust. From this moment forward, I will be working directly with our finance team to ensure that no one is ever taken advantage of again. We will fix the contracts, and we will ensure that everyone who has been unfairly charged will be contacted and refunded. As Marcus spoke, he could see a shift in the room. The employees began to straighten up in their chairs, some nodding, others taking notes. It was clear that they were hearing his words, and they were beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. He wasn't just speaking to them as a CEO. He was speaking to them as someone who cared deeply about the reputation they had all worked hard to build. But Marcus didn't stop there. He knew that action spoke louder than words, and he had to prove to both his staff and his customers that the dealership was committed to making things right. That's when he made a bold decision. He issued a public statement to the press, announcing that the dealership would undergo a full audit to review all contracts, transactions, and processes. He made it clear that any customers who had been unfairly charged would be contacted and offered a full refund, no questions asked. The decision to go public with the issue was a risky one, but Marcus believed it was necessary. If he wanted to regain the trust of his community, he needed to be transparent about the mistakes and show the world that he was taking full responsibility. He didn't shy away from the press coverage, knowing that it would be an uphill battle to restore the dealership's reputation. But Marcus was committed to the long-term success of the business, and he knew that doing the right thing would ultimately pay off. Over the following weeks, Marcus worked tirelessly with the finance team to ensure that the audit was thorough and that every customer who had been wronged would be contacted. The team implemented new policies and procedures to prevent future mistakes, ensuring that all contracts would be fully transparent and fair moving forward. It wasn't an easy process. The dealership had lost some customers, and the damage to their reputation was undeniable. But Marcus's unwavering commitment to honesty and fairness began to pay dividends. Customers who had been skeptical of returning to the dealership saw the genuine effort being made to right the wrongs, and many of them chose to return, impressed by the company's dedication to change. As time passed, the dealership slowly but surely rebuilt its reputation. Marcus's leadership was tested, but it ultimately reinforced his standing in the community. The message he sent to his staff was clear. No matter how difficult the road ahead, honesty, fairness, and customer satisfaction would always come first. And through his commitment to transparency, Marcus not only regained the trust of his customers, but he also earned the respect of his community, proving that doing the right thing, no matter the cost, was always the best course of action. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's story and got some valuable insights from it. If you did, make sure to hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Also, leave a comment below letting me know what you think. I love hearing from you. Stay tuned for more stories, and remember, always stay true to your values. See you in the next video.